In this episode, I'm going to cover debugging a GWT app on a remote server. To do this, I'm going to use the GWT Development Mode, which is Super Dev Mode, and I'll change the module.nocache.js IP address so I can debug it on the remote server. I'll show how to do this. Then I'll deploy the war and start the code server, which will start up Super Dev Mode. Then I'll debug the app using the remote server. So to get started, I'm going to show you the components that I've got wired up already. I've already created a sandbox app, and in the sandbox app, it's a simple Maven configuration, and I'm going to go to the Palm. I'll just show you that it's GXT 402 at the moment and 281, or GWT 281. This can be GWT 2.7, and the Java can be 1.7 as well, but I'm going to use 1.8 for this tutorial. It's not dependent on this episode whether you use 1.7 or 1.8. I'm just showing you the parts that I've got wired up in the Palm configuration. Then I got the GWT Maven plugin. I'm using the old plugin. I haven't wired up the new plugin in this tutorial, but you could use that as well. Moving on down, I have the support artifacts. You could use the GXT 4.0 as an example, or just basically a GWT project. Doesn't matter. You don't have to use GXT in this tutorial, but I'm using it. And I'm going to move on down. I have the dependencies listed last, and what I will do is set up a profile here and go over the steps of how I initialize debugging. So on the entry point, I just have a simple configuration of a GXT button. And in this button, I have a select handler, and it just fires off a message or a dialog that says, hey, GXT works. Okay, so the next thing I have is, I'm going to go to the instructions. And in the instructions, I show how I wire up the tunnel, and I'm using a Wildfly server. And what I'm doing is setting up a tunnel from my Mac to the Wildfly. I have access to it on my local network. So I'm just creating a tunnel with 9990, which is to the Wildfly admins. What does that look like? So let me go to the Wildfly admin. Here it is, Wildfly. And it's basically a web server located on Google Compute. Now this server could be any server located on any remote destination. And if I look at the server IP address, in this case it's Google Compute's DHCP, but point is it's a public IP that's not located on my network and not located, or it's not of localhost. And here's my context of my web app. I didn't set this context to the root just so I can show you how it works. So if I look at this, I'm going to load it up. You can see I've already deployed it once during testing, and it's trying to load up Super Dev Mode. But I'm going to show you how I got there and how I wire up Super Dev Mode. So to get started, the very first thing I need to do is set up the debugging process. And what I need to do is show you the parts for that. What I'm going to do is go to the target folder, and I'm going to show you how I set up the bits for debugging. So what I want to do is actually run a code server and not GWT development mode with an embedded Jetty server. So let me look at the shortcuts for that. So if you go debug as, there's a few different options to launch your debugging process. And what I'm aiming for is a GWT development mode. This will start up a code server. If you use GWT development mode with Jetty, it starts up the code server with the embedded Jetty server using the dev mode entry point. This uses the code server entry point, GWT development mode. So once I set it up, it will go into the launch configurations. And let's look at the launch configurations, debug configurations. Let's just say, okay, I already have one created, and I'm going to show how to create it here in a moment. But let's look at the arguments. It simply sets up log info and the module, and this is going to compile into the temp directory. But what I need to do is add a launcher directory. But before that, let me show you how I set it up. So let me delete it. Then I'm going to click on close on this dialog. Okay, so I'm going to right click. I need to do this to create the configuration. So I'm going to right click and go run as GWT development mode. And once it starts, I'm going to stop the process because what I want to do is go back and add the launcher directory. So I'm going to go back to add the launcher directory. So if I select on my sandbox app, and then I'm going to go to the arguments. And what I want to do is add in launcher, LAUNCHER, capital D. And what I need to do is get the path to the web app directory where it's going to be compiling into the project. So I'm going to hit apply. I'll come back and add the path here in a moment. So let me add a to-do there just to show you where it's going to go. Okay, so I'm going to hit close and yes to update. Okay, so the the path is going to be in the target and the web app directory. So this is the web app directory. This is what gets compiled into the WAR and pushed to the remote server. So I'm going to hit Properties, and what I want to do is copy the path to that. So I'm going to copy the absolute path and go Control-C and then click on Cancel, and then I'm going to go back to the launcher configurations, debug configurations, and then I want to go to the arguments, and then I want to replace the to-do with the launcher path. Okay, so now that I've added the path to the launcher directory, which is basically the WAR directory if you're using dev mode, this pushes the compiling bits into this project, this web app directory. So let me click on Close, and then Yes. And when the code server is launched, by going up here and launching the code server, it initializes debugging. Well, it looks like I have another launcher here. I'll explain this in a minute. Init debugging, and that's the Maven process. So, okay, so let's say I wanted to launch the code server. Let's just go ahead and launch it. I can see the working directory. That's the temp directory. And then it's going to push a nocache.js file into the web app directory. So what does that mean? Let me go into the web app directory. In fact, let me clear this because there's some compiled bits in here from testing. So let me just go refresh and delete to clear it. So this is a good step to show you the working bits of how it's wired up. So I'm going to clear it. So let me stop the process again and restart it. So let me go back to the process. I'll stop it. Just shows you where all the bits are. I'm going to go and relaunch it. And this is going to push the bits of this compilation process into that web app directory, and then gives me the code server port. Okay, so here's target. So let me just refresh it to make sure it's up to date because there's new resources in it. And you can see that's a lot smaller because the bits haven't been compiled yet. So let me go into that project directory, and here's the magic piece that I want. And it's the my sandbox or module.nocache.js. Now, when in production mode, you won't see super dev mode in the content of this file. But when you're in super dev mode or when you're launching it by code server, it initializes differently. So let me look in here. So I see my sandbox project. And if you look in here, let me just show you if I locate super dev mode. There it is at the top. And then I'll create some more finds. And there it is in the middle. And on down it shows, hey, I can't run super dev mode. So what this process does is, let's look at the host name. And where is the host name? The host name basically gets the window location host name. So when you're running on localhost and the code server is running on localhost, that's great. The code server then will load the contents because it triggers a compile by sending off a request to this host name 9876. And let's look at that. Okay, so let's look at the host name. Let me go back to the debugging perspective, and then I'll open up the code server. Okay, so the code server is running, but it's running on localhost. What I need to do is actually change this to my private IP. And the way I'm going to do that is go to the launching config and change the bind address. So I'm going to end the processes and go back to the launcher configurations. And then I'm going to select my app, go to arguments, and then what I want to do is add in the bind address here. Bind address 0.0.0.0. This will just say, listen on all the network addresses I have available on my machine. So I'm going to hit apply and close. Okay, let me rerun that process and just verify that I changed the IP address. So I'm going to rerun it by relaunching it there. Okay, so I should see it show up in the bottom here in a moment. So the console spits out some output for the initialization. Okay, there I go. 192.168.1.2 and then 19876. So I load it up and there I go. So this is the debugging browser for SDBG. Now I want to do is deploy the WAR and change the IP address so it points back to this server. So I'm going to copy this address here and deploy it with that address. So if I wanted to change it here, I could change it in the file after I started the super dev mode, and I could change it right here like that. Whoop, I copied in the http://// but I want to remove that and encapsulate it in a string. So it's a string value. So host name then will become the request or the server URL. And when I request the page, it will send a request and start the compilation process. But I can show you in a moment how to do this automatically. This is the key piece right here. If you're running on a remote machine, and then let's say I'm running on a remote machine and it was Windows localhost hostname. Well, that will become 35.184.147. And that's not where I'm running my code server. I'm running it on 192.168.1.2. So there's a mismatch here. And the way to get around that is basically changing the host name. Well, I've got an entire process. I'm going to show in 4 steps how to do this automatically with initializing Maven. And it'll automatically deploy to the remote server as well, so I can debug it. And this remote server may be my staging server, or basically my design server where I'm pushing the bits and testing it with my full application and services on my network. Okay, so now let's say I want to wire up this process to push all the bits to the remote server so I can test Init the debugging process. Okay, so let me get started. I've already set up some instructions to show me how to do that. The first thing I need to do is set a profile. So I'm going to go to my Palm, and what I want to do is set up a debugging profile. So I'm going to go ahead and start by putting a profile. This will allow me to do a separate process outside of Maven. It'll make more sense in a minute. So profiles, and I'm going to autocomplete that. And then I want to do is add a profile. So add a profile, and in this profile I want to name the ID debug. So I'm going to go ID, and that is going to be debug. So that means, let me just show you what that equates to. If I go to debugging configurations, I've already set it up here. I went down to Init debugging. This is a launcher configuration to launch Maven, and I've said let me start the goal install with the profile debug, which matches the ID. Or let me just point in here. I could type into the terminal mvn install, or here, let me just remove this mvn install. Let me go -p and debug. That would be the same thing as running this goal in the IDE, but I can't do that here because I'm just going to call install because it wires it up through the launcher. So the goal is install and the profile is debug. So let me close that. Okay, so profile debug, and then I'm going to add in build plugins, and these build plugins will run something a little bit differently than my production process. So I'm going to copy in a few plugins here, and the first one is what I want to do is copy. Okay, so let me do this. I'll go back to my nocache.js file, and what I want to do is copy this into a debug folder. Okay, so I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go up to the root directory and go new file folder, and what I want to do is call this debug. Now you could put this in another location. I'm going to put it here for simplicity in this tutorial, but the point is copy this, and I'll show you why in a moment. So I'm going to paste this in, and what I want to do is paste it in. Well, I could do this, basically have it hard-coded or hard-code the IP, but this wouldn't work for every developer. So what I want to do is revert that, change, and go window, location, host name, and I'll save that. Okay, now that's saved, let me look at the instructions, and what I want to do is copy this piece here, and what I want to do is copy the profile plugins. And the first step, I'm going to only copy the first step because I want to walk through this, and I'll walk through what I'm doing with each plugin. And I'm going to post this online after I'm done with this video, and you can go look at it in more detail. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Palm, and I want to go down to the build, and oops, I forgot to add plugins here. What I want to do is add plugins because I'm adding plugins into the build process for the debug profile. So the first step is here, copy the module.nocache.js file and copy that into the web app directory. And so what I want to do is put my own module. I've already done the module renaming here. So basically I'm saying, okay, this is in the debug folder, base directory debug. Let me just confirm and look at that. So if I collapse the nodes up there, and if I look, there it is, it's in the debug folder. So if I go back to the Palm, it's in the debug, and what I'm doing with that is moving it to the web app directories. where's the web app directory? So I'm going to click on that and look at that. So that's in the project build directory, which is target. And that's the build final name, which is, in this case, the module name and the version. So if I go back down to the bottom, it is module project nocache.js is going to be moved into the web app directory. Okay, so that's the first step. So I'm going to move that. I'm going to save the POM. So the second step is, what am I doing in the second step? So I'm going to copy that and I'm retrieving the IP address. And why am I retrieving it? Because I don't want to hard code it. Now I may have to, if my network is complicated, I could just hard code that in there and provide it through my settings XML, which is only on my system. I could do that through a variable, or I could use, there's another way of doing it, is which I could use a class clobber and clobber the launcher directory class, and I've shown that in other methods, and I won't cover that in this video, but that's another method. And there's another way of doing it is actually you could tunnel back from the server, which means I could tunnel the request of this code server back through the local host to my machine as well. But that's complicated in a multi-developer environment. But this is pretty easy. So what I'm going to do is get the IP in the second step. Let me go back to the instructions. And the third step is the meat and potatoes of this part. So what I'm going to do is go back and I'm going to paste in step 3. And what it's doing is basically going and saying window location host name, and that's in the nocache.js right here, host name. And this will be replaced when it's moved. So what's it going to look like in the debug folders, because this is what it's going to look like, because it'll get automatically copied to here. And let me go back to the POM. And then I'm going to say, okay, replace it with my local IP address. And this is where the directory is, and this is the file name. So basically I'm doing a quick replace of the window location hostname to my local IP address. Okay, if I've lost you, I'm going to cover this again here in a moment. Okay, so the last step is I want to deploy my install. When I run the Maven phase install, I also want to deploy it to the server because I don't want to manually have to upload it with an FTP command. So I have that here too. And for each server, there's a little bit different config, but it's the same process. And it can get there in different ways. You can use a command by terminal. You could use some other process, Maven execution, to push this is basically wrapping up the file as a war, and then it's going to push the bits to the server. And I'll show that in a moment in more detail. Okay, so I'm going to change the password. If you see my password, it's going to go away because it's a temporary server I set up, or an image on Google Compute, which is in the cloud. Okay, so the next piece is I want to set up a launcher to run this debugging init process. So let me do that. Let me go to debug configurations. And it's going to be init debugging, and I'm going to delete this and show you how I set it up. So I'm going to hit delete. Yes, go to the Maven build, and I'm going to hit add, and I got to select the workspace and then the project. Okay, I've selected the base directory, and now I'm going to install. And what I want to do is call the debug profile. Well, I'm going to do install, but I've got special bits in the debug profile that I'm going to clobber the basic install. So I'm going to click apply. And I'm going to click on close. So let me look at this. I forgot to explain a couple of the goals in this process, and that is the copy resources is going to be done on the prepare package phase. So that's before the war is zipped up. And then the same thing for the IP address to get it, and the same thing for changing the IP address in the file. But when I go to deploy, it's going to be at the deploy phase of during the install, I'm going to deploy the bits here. Okay, so that's going to be the process that goes. So let's just try that. So I'm going to run this by going debug configurations and init the process. So I'm going to change this to debug init, and this will run. Okay, I'll apply that. Let's just confirm goals install and the profile debug and hit debug. Did I hit it? Or okay, there it goes. So I'm going to go move this to the bottom and expand it a little bit. And you can see the process is running. And the very first part of this will do a Maven install. I don't necessarily need to do a Maven install which will activate a GWT compile. I could do a GWT compile skip in this phase and then push the bits. Well, it looks like I've already compiled GWT, so it did skip that already and then it's going to push the bits because the code server will do the compiling that I want. Okay, so let's just confirm that it did the job. So what it should have done is copied this in here into the project directory and renamed the IP address. So let me look at that. Okay, so I don't know if it did it for sure. So let me just refresh that because I already had it changed. Remember when I changed it a little bit earlier in this conversation or this tutorial. Let me delete the whole target directory and reinitialize the whole step. Go to delete. Okay. So I'm going to rerun the install process and debug init. So I'm ready to debug. I'm going to install. And what this does is compile all the server parts and the client. So you can see here, this time it's compiling the client. I could skip this phase or I could skip this step in the debug init because the compiler will do it. So okay, so I'm letting it compile even though I don't need it to. This is a little bit redundant right now. So just remember that. The way I could do that, let me just show you how I could ignore it. In fact, I could just do it right now. So let me go up and copy the GWT plugin. And well, here, I'm going to stop it and just do that part of the process right now because that will be easier to do. So I'm going to copy the top of this plugin and I'm going to move it down to the debug section and into the build. And then I gotta finish it, configuration and build. And so let me see. So what's wrong with it here? Oops, I put it in the wrong section. Let me just copy that and move it down to the plugins. I see what I was doing wrong there. Okay, so I'm gonna put it at the top of the plugins and move it on over. Okay, and then save the file. Okay, the red X went away, so that was good. Remove a little space, and what I want to do is go skip. Go autocomplete here, skip. Okay, there you go, and I'll say true. Oops, I'm going to make it lowercase. Okay, now it'll skip the GWT compiler process, so let me reinitialize that. Okay, I can see that it's now building the bits and pushing it off to the web server. Okay, there we go. Looks like it's on the web server phase. It's authenticating. Build success. Okay, the bits should be there. So the next step is to run the code servers because I want to make a request. So I'm going to go debug as, and then I'm going to select the code server. And that was this here, my module name, because I right clicked on it and automatically named it the module. So I'm going to start up the code server. The web server is already running because it's in the cloud. Oops, I have another process running. I've already started it once, so let me just end those processes here. Terminate all. Okay, so I have no more processes. Let me just reinitialize that. So I'm going to start the code server, which is GWT Development Mode, and brackets around the code server. Okay, there I go. I can see the code server is running, so I'll load it up. Okay, let me go to the web page, and the web page is right here. So I'm going to copy that into the SDBG browser, or the browser that's set up with SDBG. And there we go. You can see that it says compiling. And why does it say compiling? It's because it knows where to trigger the request is by setting the IP address. So let me just go back to the target folder. And that's what I was after. I can see that I haven't refreshed it yet, so refresh. Here's the important piece. In the target web app directory, in the project compiling bits, you can see it looks like a production compile a little bit there because I did run that and it compiled the permutations. And if I go down, let me just go down here. Where is project? Here's dev mode. Oh, that wasn't it. nocache.js. And here's where, oh, look at that. It's not correct. It didn't change the IP address. Why is that? So let me just start the process over. Let me just go and delete the directory. It'll say sync error if you haven't refreshed it. And what I want to do is run the debugging init again. And this should compile the pieces and push it up to the server. And I can debug it by looking at this web app directory. Okay, so it should be ready. So I'm going to refresh it and look in the directory and open up nocache.js. Okay, so what it did is it didn't overwrite that time, and I had to delete it manually. So now that it's ready, so let me go back and reload. Okay, there it goes. It's trying to request to my local desktop. Okay, so you can see that the code server is trying to request the address 192.168.1.29876, and it's trying to make a request there, and it's not running. So let me look at the debug process. Okay, so the code server I terminated it earlier. So what I want to do is start it up again by running it, launching it. So there it goes, it's running. Okay, let me go back to the browser. Oh, it looks like it automatically made a request when it was available. So let me refresh that. Or that was an earlier build or refresh. Okay, so you can see the compile and it worked. Well, let me look at the other browser. I can't tell which browser is the SDBG browser. So I'm going to click on cancel and reload. Okay, it works there too. So I'm going to close this because this is the Wildfly management. And this is the SDBG browser, which I could use for marshalling breakpoints between the browser and the IDE. Okay, so let me make a change now just to verify it works. So I'm going to go back to the IDE editor, and what I want to do is find the entry point, and I'm going to go to the GWT entry point here. And okay, so here's the entry point, and I want to change some text, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, now I'm going to save that and go back to the IDE and reload it. So if you can see, this is on the remote server with the context of this. Oh, there, it updated. Well, GWT code server updated the bits and it was injected into the DOM. Okay, that was really cool. Just keep in mind, one thing I didn't mention is if I have some server classes and I change those, or domain object on the client that affects the server, you'll have to run the debugging init again. And what that does is compile the classes, put them in the war, and push them off to the server, because the server classes are not getting updated on the server. So let me just repeat and go over this process. So I'm going to stop the launch here. Okay, I'm going to clear it by terminating the processes. And what I want to do is, okay, here's the Wildfly management. I'm going to close this because I don't need it anymore. Go back. There am I. And what I want to do is explain this process over. Okay, so there's 4 steps. Let me just look at the instructions and explain this process. Oh, but before that, let me go to the nocache.js. Okay, so the nocache.js is where all the magic happens. Where you see the window location hostname, it has to be replaced with my local IP. So when I'm running this JavaScript file on a remote server, it points back to my project here. So, and what I want to do is I'll just clear this target directory to make sure we can see the process. So refresh it. Let me refresh, and then I'm going to delete the file. It looks like the contents were out of sync, so I'm going to delete. Click OK. Okay, so there's 4 bits. The first bit is to copy the nocache.js file into the webapp directory. And why I'm copying it is it alleviates the need for a class clobber or a change of the IP address manually. And that allows my Maven process to pick up the file I need, which is basically a simply generated file, and replace this with my local IP. Now I could hard code it on my machine, or I could put the IP in my settings.xml, the Maven configuration, and pipe that in with filter. But in this case, I'm just going to copy it. So let's say I'm a developer on any machine, it'll copy the local IP. So it'll copy it to the webapp directory. Okay, so that's the first step in the POM. Let me minimize this lower view. The second step is get the IP of my machine. The third step is, okay, replace that IP and replace window location hostname with my local IP. And the fourth step is, okay, let's deploy it to the server so I don't have to use an FTP command to push it up. Now with Tomcat or WebLogic or any other web server, the web configuration here may be different. It doesn't matter how it's configured as long as it automatically pushes the bits. I could use a terminal command and wire up the command just to push it to the remote server. It alleviates me from exploding the war on the server manually. Okay, so the next step is to debug process, and what I do is go to the debug configurations, and I created a mid-debug init, and it says, okay, run the install phase of the Maven process and add in the debug profile. So when I call the debug profile, it says add in these plugin bits. So in this case, I skipped them GWT compile because it'll clobber anything that you set here with the settings above, and it will run these other plugins as well in the install process. Okay, so I'm going to do that. So I'm going to start it up, debug init. And when debug init installs, we're going to check to make sure that the nocache.js gets copied with my custom IP, my local IP. And so let me get the target folder ready. Okay, I can see it's authenticating, so it's already done its job. So I'm going to refresh it over here and look at the project nocache.js. And there it is. That's basically what those 4 steps or 3 steps are doing in my Palm configuration. And I could manually do this as well. So then it pushes it off to the web server and I can debug it. So let me just change the entry point and we can update and verify it works. So I'm going to remove this and do some pounds here. Okay, so I'm going to go to my web server. Oh, I'm not there yet. So let me go to development mode. I'm going to open up SDBG by double clicking on that. Well, okay, so I need to go to it. So I'll type it in. I can use a bookmarklet or bookmark to go to it. Okay, so it's connecting. Oops, I'm at the wrong IP. Because this is DHCP, it changed, so it went to 100. Okay, it looks like I forgot to start the code server. I'll go back. I just launched by double clicking on that link, it launches the Chrome web app for SDBG. It doesn't matter which order you do these in, but I just need to start the code server. So I could name it code server here and make it a little bit simpler, but I'm going to start that process. Okay, there it goes, GWT Development Mode code server. Okay, I'll go back and wait for it to start. So I can see it down here at the bottom. Okay, there it is. It started. So I'm going to click on cancel and then reload. Okay, it's compiling. Now I know that IP address was correct. And there we go. The application has changed. Now I could have a multiple module project. And if I specify those modules in the boot configuration, I could debug those as well. Okay, so that concludes this video today on wiring up Super Dev Mode and pushing those bits to the web app server and doing Super Dev Mode compile. So thanks for watching today. Follow me for more tips and tricks on debugging GWT applications, and I'll catch you later.